The rain had been falling for hours, steady, cold, soaking through Portland's empty streets like a memory that wouldn't leave. Officer Naomi Reyes sat behind the wheel of her cruiser, hands wrapped around a lukewarm cup of gas station coffee, eyes distant. The city was quiet, but her mind was not. It never was, not since that night. Apollo's leash still hung in her locker, untouched, his vest still folded, his photo taped to her dashboard, slightly curled at the corners now. She hadn't had the heart to take it down. Some wounds don't bleed, but they never stop hurting. When the radio crackled to life, she barely reacted. Unit 12, report of a vehicle fire, River Road and 17th. Unknown if occupied. She sighed. Probably just another abandoned car set ablaze by teenagers with nothing better to do. She clicked on her lights and pulled away from the curb. But something in her gut shifted. As she turned onto River Road, the glow hit her before anything else. Orange flames licking into the sky, smoke rising like a signal from hell. She slammed the brakes. The truck was engulfed. A black pickup, flames spilling from the undercarriage, heat radiating off the wet pavement. But it wasn't the fire that made her heart seize. It was the sound. A bark. Then another, wild, desperate. Naomi bolted. People stood huddled on the sidewalk, shouting, filming, doing nothing. She shoved past them, her boots splashing through puddles. Through the smoke-streaked passenger window she saw him, massive, gray, and terrified. A German shepherd, front paws clawing at the glass, eyes locked on hers. Screaming without words. The world narrowed. She didn't wait for the fire department, didn't think about procedures. She only saw him, trapped, alone, screaming like Apollo had in her dreams. No time, no plan, just instinct. Naomi grabbed her baton, but it wasn't enough. The window wouldn't give. The fire roared louder, spitting embers against her jacket. Her breath came in shallow bursts, the smoke clawing at her lungs. "Damn it," she whispered. And then, bare hands, one punch, two, glass cracked, three, shattered. She reached in, the heat scorched her skin, burning through the sleeves. The dog yelped, recoiling, but she grabbed his collar, ignoring the pain. "Come on, boy, I've got you, I've got you." With a heave, she pulled him out, stumbling backward onto the slick road as the truck hissed behind them. Her body hit the ground hard, the dog tumbling beside her, coughing, burned but alive. The crowd gasped, someone clapped, someone sobbed. Naomi cradled the dog, shaking. His fur was singed, his paws blistered, but his eyes, they stared up at her with something between fear and recognition. Her chest cracked open. That's when an older man broke through the circle of onlookers, face pale, eyes wide. "Echo!" he cried, dropping to his knees beside them. Naomi turned to him, still gasping for air. The man, Mr. Harris, wrapped trembling arms around the dog. His voice broke. He's all I have left. Please, please tell me he'll be okay." Naomi, blood smeared on her palms, whispered, "He's safe now." Harris looked at her, tears streaming. "His name's Echo. He belonged to my son. After the accident, I couldn't breathe. Echo, he's the last heartbeat of my family." Naomi couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Because in that moment, holding a stranger's dog, burned and trembling, she felt the ghost of Apollo beside her. Not gone, just guiding her here. The rain kept falling, but it couldn't wash away what had just begun. The station was quieter than usual the next morning. Naomi sat at her desk, staring blankly at the half-written report in front of her. Her hands were bandaged, blistered from the night before, and the pain flared every time she reached for her coffee. But it wasn't the burns that hurt the most. It was the silence, the kind that settles in your bones when something's missing. Apollo used to lie under that desk, head between his paws, tail thumping every time she shifted in her chair. Now the space beneath her feet was just cold, quiet. Everyone had congratulated her, called her a hero, said she saved a life. But all Naomi could hear was the one she hadn't saved. The bomb that tore through that warehouse wasn't meant for Apollo. It was meant for her. He had lunged, selfless, loyal, doing what he was trained to do, and she hadn't seen it coming. That guilt didn't go away just because someone clapped when she smashed a window. A soft knock at the side entrance broke her thoughts. She turned, expecting another officer. Instead, it was Mr. Harris, standing awkwardly, holding a leash. And at the other end, bandaged and limping, was Echo. His ears perked the moment he saw her. He didn't bark, didn't pull, just walked slowfully across the floor until he was in front of her chair. Naomi froze. Echo leaned in, gently resting his head on her lap. She looked down, and something in her cracked open. His fur was patchy, his ribs visible beneath the singed hair. But it was his eyes that hit her hardest, soft, wounded, grateful. She didn't say a word, just laid a hand on his head and let out the breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "I hope it's okay," Harris said quietly. "He's been restless all morning, kept sitting by the door like he was waiting." Naomi nodded once. "I think he remembers," Harris added. There was a pause, filled only by the soft sound of Echo breathing. Then Harris cleared his throat. "Would you maybe join us for a walk? We go to Cathedral Park most evenings. I think it'd mean a lot to him." Naomi blinked. Walks were something she and Apollo used to do to unwind after long shifts. Late at night, when the streets were empty and the only sounds were paw steps and city wind. Now someone else was offering that silence back to her. Not to fill it, but to share it. She hesitated, heart pounding. I don't know," she said. Harris didn't. He just smiled kindly. "No pressure, but the offer stands." She looked down again. Echo hadn't moved. He just stayed there, head still on her lap, as if he was willing to wait as long as she needed. Naomi closed her eyes, exhaled slowly, and whispered, "Yeah, okay, I'll come." And in that simple moment, no medals, no applause, something began to shift. Not heal, not yet, but thaw. Because sometimes it's not the noise that brings you back. It's the quiet that chooses to stay. The first walk had been quiet, tentative steps along damp pavement, neither Naomi nor Harris saying much. Echo limped slightly, but his tail wagged at every breeze, every leaf that fluttered past. There was something comforting about the rhythm of their feet, the soft crunch of leaves underfoot, the mist clinging to the trees. No expectations, just movement. But one walk turned into 2, then 5. Then it became routine. They met at Cathedral Park most evenings. Naomi would arrive in uniform, sometimes straight from shift, and Harris would be waiting near the old wooden bench with Echo sitting patiently at his side. The moment Echo saw her, he always stood up, ears alert, body still healing, but spirit eager. Naomi found herself talking more than she expected. She told stories about Apollo, the way he used to grunt softly in his sleep, the time he tore a hole in her couch but looked so guilty she couldn't even scold him. She talked about the raid. Not all of it, but enough. Harris never interrupted. He just listened, nodding, letting the space between their words do the rest. In return, he opened up too. His son, Caleb, had been 25, a music teacher. Died in a car crash on a rainy afternoon, not unlike the one Naomi pulled Echo from. Afterward, Harris didn't speak for weeks, couldn't paint, couldn't sleep. He adopted Echo on a whim, barely knowing how to care for a dog. But somehow, Echo knew how to care for him. He filled the silence, Harris said once. Or maybe he didn't fill it, just made it bearable. One snowy afternoon, Naomi arrived with something in her coat pocket. They stood beneath the bare branches of a maple tree, Echo sniffing curiously at the snow. Naomi knelt beside him, hands trembling slightly. "I brought something," she said, "of Apollo's." She pulled out a worn leather collar, weathered, scratched, but still intact. Harris recognized it instantly. Naomi looked at him, her voice soft. "Mind if I?" He nodded. Echo stood still as Naomi gently fastened the collar around his neck. It hung a little loose, but it fit. Echo didn't flinch. He just looked at her. Those steady amber eyes holding something ancient and kind. It wasn't replacement. It was continuation. A tribute. A passing of light. One guardian to another. The ceremony was simple. No spotlight, no marching band. Just a circle of colleagues gathered in the precinct's community hall. The faint scent of coffee and old carpet in the air. Naomi stood stiffly near the front, her uniform freshly pressed, the bandages on her hands mostly healed now. She didn't feel like a hero. She hadn't since the night Apollo died. And yet, here she was. The police chief gave a short speech, words like bravery, quick action, and exceptional service. Naomi heard them, but they floated past her like distant echoes. Her eyes drifted to the back of the room where Harris stood quietly, one hand resting on Echo's head. Echo looked different now. He'd gained some weight back. His fur had grown in where it had burned away. But more than that, his gaze was calmer, steadier, still alert, still aware, but at peace. When Naomi's name was called, the room clapped. She stepped forward and accepted the medal, fingers cold despite the warmth of the applause. The chief leaned in, whispering, "You did more than save a life that night." Naomi forced a smile, but her heart was still somewhere else. Later, after the room emptied, she stepped outside for air. The late afternoon sun slanted through the bare branches of the courthouse trees. The air smelled like dry leaves and winter coming. Harris approached, Echo trotting slightly ahead of him. The dog nudged her leg, then sat at her feet as if he'd always belonged there. Harris cleared his throat. "I didn't want to say this in there," he said, voice quieter than usual, "but I've been thinking about something." Naomi turned, unsure what to expect. He looked at her, eyes misty. "Echo, he belonged to my son. He was Caleb's before he was mine. And after Caleb died, I wasn't sure I'd ever connect with anyone again. But lately, watching you with him, seeing the way he looks at you." He paused, then continued, voice trembling. "I think maybe he belongs to you now too." The words hit her like a soft punch to the chest. For so long, Naomi had lived inside a fortress of grief. Apollo's death didn't just break her heart, it made her doubt whether she deserved to feel anything again. But in this moment, standing beside a man who had known his own kind of loss, and a dog who had survived fire and fear, something inside her finally shifted. Not just grief, gratitude. Not just loss, connection. She knelt beside Echo, brushing her fingers through his thick coat, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you," she said, not just to Harris or to Echo, but to whatever had led her here. For the first time in a long while, she didn't push the feeling away. She let it stay. The nightmares still come. Some nights it's the warehouse again, dark, suffocating, filled with the sound of boots pounding against concrete, and the radio screaming static. And then the blast, the blinding flash, the pressure wave that knocked her off her feet, and silence. But worse than the silence is what always follows, the bark that cuts off mid-sound, Apollo's bark. And the image, his body lying still before she even knew he'd jumped in front of her. Naomi wakes drenched in sweat, fists clenched, breath caught in her throat. The walls of her apartment close in around her, and for a moment she forgets where she is. But now, before she can completely spiral, there's a knock at the door. Or her phone buzzes. Echo's restless. "You up for a walk?" It's always from Harris. No need for long explanations, no forced optimism, just a simple invitation back to the real world. Naomi slips on her coat, slides into her boots, and finds them waiting under the flickering streetlight. Harris with his old wool scarf, Echo sitting tall beside him, tail thumping softly when she approaches. The walks are quiet, but meaningful. At first they talk about Echo, how his appetites come back, how he stubbornly refuses to wear boots on icy mornings. But slowly, almost without realizing it, Naomi begins to share more. She talks about her mother, how addiction pulled her away before Naomi even made it to middle school, about growing up with her abuela in a cramped apartment on the east side, about the hours she spent alone while her grandmother worked nights, and the way she swore she'd grow up to wear a badge just to feel seen. And then, the part she never really told anyone, what it was like being the only woman of color in her academy class, the stares, the doubts, the quiet, cutting comments from officers who thought she was diversity PR, how Apollo had been the only one who didn't need convincing. He just saw her, believed in her, worked beside her like she belonged there. Harris doesn't interrupt, he just listens, gaze steady, hands deep in his coat pockets as they walk. And then one night when the moon hangs low and the wind is biting, he stops walking. "I never told you," he says quietly, "how close I came to checking out." Naomi looks over, eyebrows raised. "After Caleb died," he says, voice thick, "I stopped painting, stopped eating. I kept hearing his voice in that house, but I knew he wasn't there. One night, I took every pill in the cabinet and lined them up." He pauses. The street lamp casts long shadows on the pavement. And Echo, his voice breaks. He started howling, not barking, howling, like a siren. Neighbors called the cops. I was sitting there with a bottle in my hand, and he came crashing into the bathroom door. Wouldn't stop howling until I dropped it. Naomi doesn't say anything. She just reaches out and puts a hand on his shoulder. They don't talk for a few blocks after that. But they don't need to. There's a language in survival, in shared pain that doesn't need to be translated. Naomi sees it now, in Echo's eyes, in Harris's worn hands, in the way her own chest doesn't feel quite so hollow when they're near. They're not bound by blood, not connected by anything the world would recognize as family, but they are linked by grief, by resilience, by the invisible threads of two people and a dog who have clawed their way out of silence. And somewhere along the line, between midnight walks and whispered memories, they become something real. A family with no name, but every reason to exist. The air smelled the same. Dust, grass, a hint of dog sweat and anticipation. Naomi stood just outside the fence of the K9 training field, hands stuffed into her jacket pockets, heart pounding like it did the day she first stepped onto this ground as a rookie handler. This was where Apollo learned everything. Obedience, scent tracking, bite work, trust. It was also where they built their rhythm, side by side, heart to heart. Now, she stood alone. The memory of his bark echoed faintly in her chest. She watched the new recruits run drills, young officers shouting commands, eager dogs sprinting through obstacle courses. It should have felt familiar. Instead, it felt like too much, too loud, too alive. But just as she stepped back, she felt a nudge at her knee. Echo. He looked up at her, ears relaxed, head tilted, amber eyes steady. He didn't bark, didn't push. He just stood there, breathing beside her, a silent anchor in the storm of memory. Naomi swallowed hard, then slowly she walked toward the gate. The other handlers noticed. One of them, Officer Mills, fresh out of academy, smiled and waved. "Hey, Reyes, you coming in?" She hesitated, then nodded. Her boots touched the field, and something cracked inside her. Not in pain, something else, something softer. She joined the drill circle, her voice calm but a little shaky. The dogs obeyed. The handlers listened. From the sidelines, Echo sat patiently, eyes locked on her every move. She was back. Not the same, but not broken either. Spring crept into Portland with soft rains and wildflowers that burst unexpectedly along sidewalks and fence posts. The trees at Cathedral Park, once bare and brittle in the cold, now bloomed with fresh green. Tulips pushed up from the soil like quiet promises, and the sky finally stayed light longer than dark. Naomi sat on the bench by the old trailhead, her boots muddy from the walk-in. Beside her, Harris leaned back with a tired but easy smile. And just beyond them, Echo was running, really running. No limp, no hesitation, just paws pounding the soft earth, ears flying, tail slicing the air behind him. He chased nothing and everything. The wind, the joy of movement, the freedom that had once been taken but had somehow returned. Naomi watched him, her eyes wet with something that wasn't sadness. "I never thought I could love another dog," she whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. "Not after Apollo. I thought it would be betrayal, like letting him go." Harris didn't speak. He just waited, eyes fixed gently on her face. Naomi reached into her coat pocket. Her hand closed around something worn and familiar, Apollo's collar. The leather was cracked in places, the metal tag still etched with his name. She had carried it for months, tucked into drawers, moved from bag to bag, held it on nights when the memories came too fast to fight. She looked at it now like she was seeing it for the first time. "He didn't replace Apollo," she said, nodding toward Echo. He carries his Echo forward." She held out the collar to Harris. "I couldn't let it go before," she said, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. "But now, I think it belongs with him." Harris took it with careful hands. He looked down at it for a long moment, his own eyes glistening. Then he reached over and clasped Naomi's hand. "You're not just part of Echo's life," he said softly. "You're part of mine." Naomi couldn't answer right away. Her throat was tight, but she nodded. And that was enough. Echo trotted back toward them, tongue lolling, fur damp with dew. He slowed as he neared, then gently rested his head on Naomi's shoulder, quiet, content, as if he knew something sacred had just passed between them. They sat there for a while, the three of them. No rush, no need to fill the silence. The kind of silence that no longer hurt, because it was shared. Eventually, they rose and started walking again, taking the path that curved along the riverbank. Echo led the way, occasionally circling back, brushing against Naomi's legs like he was checking in. As they reached the old wooden bridge, the one Caleb had loved, the one Apollo had once crossed in training, Naomi paused. She tilted her face to the sky. The light filtered through the leaves above, dancing across her cheeks. "Apollo," she whispered, closing her eyes. "I'm okay now. Thank you for bringing me here." In the distance, a bark rang out, not loud, not desperate, just clear and joyful, carried on the wind like a note from another time. Naomi smiled. Not a smile of forgetting, but of remembering, of knowing that grief could become something gentler, that love, once rooted deep enough, never really leaves. It just echoes forward, in new shapes, new souls, new chances. And sometimes, second chances come with 4 paws, a beating heart, and a name that sounds like hope. Echo looked back at her and barked once softly before bounding toward the next bend in the trail. Naomi followed, hand brushing against Harris's, boots crunching over new grass. They didn't need words, they had each other. They had the silence, and they had the echo that stays.